We'll get straight into this one regarding the caste review and transgender ideology and the political implications around it. So I'm just going to read out a report from the Times dated April the 12th, 2024. The report's by Stephen Swinford, the political editor. Labour has spent the past decade trying to shut women up and creating an atmosphere of intimidation on trans issues, the Health Secretary has said. Victoria Atkins said it was a little bit rich of the Labour Party to be lecturing the rest of us after the opposition welcomed Dr Hilary Cass's report on NHS gender services. Just a disclaimer, Hilary Cass is a woman. Hilary could be a man or a woman's name, but she's a woman. Atkins told Sky News Labour has spent the last 10 years trying to shut women up when it comes to this. They have been part of the ideology, the culture wars, creating an atmosphere of intimidation for anyone who dared to question this ideology. So it's a little bit rich of the Labour Party to be lecturing the rest of us now, having been so forthright in their support for this ideology in the past. Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, said on Wednesday that Stonewall, where he used to work, had been wrong to say that the trans women are women. Get over it. He told the Sun's politics show, Never Mind the Ballots, I say this with some self-criticism and reflection. If you'd asked me a few years ago on this topic, I would have said trans men are men, trans women are women, some people are trans, get over it. Let's move on. This is all blown out of proportion, and now I sort of sit and reflect and think actually there are a lot of complexities. He added, I take the criticism on the chin, and at the same time I also think that there has been some absolutely ugly rhetoric directed towards trans people who are at the wrong end of all statistics on hate crime, on self-harm, suicide, mental health. I'll come back to that point, my words, because it's important. Louise Haig, the Shadow Transport Secretary, said the use of the phrase get over it was inappropriate and represented an attempt to shut down the debate. She told Sky News Wes Streeting was right to hold his hand up and say he was wrong to use language like get over it. I don't think that's appropriate in any political discussion, particularly one where the issues are so sensitive and so potentially impactful. It's absolutely right for him to apologise for using language like that in an attempt to shut down debate. I don't think that has been writ large in the Labour Party. There have been bad faith actors on all sides. Rosie Duffield, a Labour MP who has campaigned on trans issues, accused male leaders of taking applause, praise and credit for simply listening to an expert. Duffield, who has previously compared being in the party to being in an abusive relationship because of her stance on trans issues, said many women have been blanked, sidelined, dismissed by male leaders when speaking up and exposing this for years. Cass said in a report released on Wednesday that an entire field of medicine aimed at enabling children to change gender has been built on shaky foundations. She said that there was no good evidence to support prescribing hormones to under 18s to halt puberty or transition to the opposite sex. The review also disclosed that adult clinics had refused to support a study on about 9,000 young people who had moved over the years from the now closed gender and identity services at Tavistock Trust in London to adult gender dysphoria clinics. Cass said that it would have been a world-leading opportunity to add to the evidence base and described it as hugely disappointing that they had decided not to take part. 6 of the 7 adult clinics declined to support the study, with reasons for not doing so, including ethical considerations and concerns about funder motivation and political interference. I'm not sure what their ethical considerations are when there's very real ethical considerations over what they're doing. So that's a bit ironic. Atkins said she expected full participation from public and private healthcare and wanted to block doctors working abroad from prescribing puberty blockers to children in Britain. The recommendations in the report have prompted NHS England, which have already stopped puberty blockers being given to under 16s, to announce a review into the use of hormones. It has also written to local NHS leaders to ask if they halt first appointments at adult gender clinics for people before their 18th birthday because it intends to investigate the services. I think it's very good that NHS England has done that. I personally have a big problem with bringing this stuff into children. I think the very idea of transgender children is very dubious. I mean, a child cannot legally transition, so the idea of giving puberty blockers to children, the idea of describing children even as transgender, I think is wrong. What you may have is a child that's going through potential signs of gender dysphoria, which may suggest that they may go down that path later in life. But I think the idea, for example, of having teenage girls go through mastectomies that they would later regret in their 20s, it's extremely ethically questionable. And I think adults who pander to it need a word with themselves. Now, on a related but separate report with this, Rowling can't forgive Harry Potter stars. J.K. Rowling has criticised celebrities who use their platforms to cheer on the transitioning of children and suggested she would not forgive two Harry Potter film stars even if they apologised. This is by Sean Bradley and Charlotte McLaughlin. Now, I'm not going to read out all of this because I'm going to be paraphrasing quotes that I kind of repeated. Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson have spoken out in support of transgender people following comments made by the author 58. Rowling's rebuke came amid a string of posts on Twitter X on Wednesday after a publication of the cast review, which found the lack of research and evidence on that. Well, I've already said that. Rowling, who is based in Edinburgh, responded to a post suggesting that Radcliffe and Watson would be safe in the knowledge that she would forgive them if they offered a public apology. But she replied saying, "Not safe, I'm afraid. Celebrities who cozied up to a movement intent on eroding women's hard-won rights and who use their platforms to cheer on the transitioning of minors can save their apologies for traumatized detransitioners and vulnerable women reliant on single-sex spaces." So she's not mincing her words. And I'm just going to speak. I'm going to go to the end of this report because I'm paraphrasing some of the comments. They're repeated basically. This month, Rowling appeared to challenge Police Scotland to arrest her if her social media posts had broken the law following the introduction of the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act. The force said it would take no action. There were concerns over, as I mentioned before, serious concerns over free speech. So this is some of the celebrities that have been vocal on the issue. Celebrities and politicians who had their say. Are these celebrities who cozied up to a movement intent on eroding women's hard-won rights, and are these the politicians who try to shut women up? Um, so here we go. Emma Watson, and this is quotes: "Trans people are who they say they are and deserve to live their lives without being constantly questioned or told they aren't who they say they are." That's 2020. Eddie Redmayne, of course, he was Oscar nominated for The Danish Girl. Trans women are, I think he might have won that year actually. Trans women are women, trans men are men, and non binary identities are valid. I would never want to speak on behalf of the community, but I do know that my dear transgender friends and colleagues are tired of this constant questioning of their identities, which all too often result in violence and abuse. 2020. Daniel Radcliffe. Transgender women are women. Any statement to the contrary erases the identity and dignity of transgender people and goes against all advice given by professional healthcare associations who have far more expertise in this subject matter than either Joe Rowling or I. 2020. He's being disingenuous there because many experts say the opposite, have questioned unethical treatment for minors, as the cast review shows. So he's being in. I don't know if he's just ignorant or if he's being disingenuous with that statement. Also, any statement to the contrary, well, that's just a way of shutting down debate. Any statement to the contrary is not valid, Radcliffe's basically saying. Robert Grimm. I firmly stand with the trans community and echo the sentiments expressed by many of my peers. Trans women are women, trans men are men. We should all be entitled to live with love and without judgment. 2020. Well, Mr. Grint, do you include women who question this? Should they be judged? Because they say biology matters? David Tennant's t-shirt left, "Leave trans kids alone, you absolute freaks," 2023. Well, that's pretty colourful language from you, Mr. Tennant. What about it's not women and others who are basically trying to force hormones onto children who are confused. It's not it's it's not critics who are saying to teenage girls, not trans girls, I refuse to use that for minors, but young teenage girls who are confused to have mastectomies. And you have the audacity to have this very smug, very, actually, I would say, hateful t shirt calling others freaks. Maybe Tennant should be investigated for a hate crime for that t shirt. Stonewall, Wes Streeton's former employer. Trans women are women, get over it. Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. Transgender women are women 2022. Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party. Trans women are women, also 2022. Sarah Davy, Liberal Democrat Liberal Democrat leader, women can quite clearly have a penis 2023. Even Starmer stopped short of that. Ed Miliband, former Labour leader, accused social media of stirring up a moral panic over transgender equality 2017. I say all of these celebrities and politicians do need to answer for the silencing of debate. And this idea, this mantra, this dogmatic mantra, trans women are women, trans men are men. Here's my take. People can have those opinions. I don't agree with them actually, because I do not think that someone who goes through a transition is the same as a biological woman. I just don't accept that. I accept that legally they will be recognized as a trans woman or a trans man, but I do not accept that they can say they have exactly the same experience or should be seen in exactly the same way as a biological woman. I just don't accept it. And there's a very good reason why you don't have trans women competing in women's sports, or at least why it's a very, very contentious field. Um, I think there's a very ugly intolerance from the trans lobby, and I think groups like Stonewall, they were once all about equal gay rights. I think in recent years they've become quite nasty. Um, I've no time for Stonewall. I don't like the way they go about things. And I think also, these woke celebrities who are just churning out these mantras. It's things like, love whoever you want. That's all fine, all sounds compassionate. But where's their compassion for women who are bullied and silenced, risk losing their jobs, risk, being deemed as hateful bigots and potentially getting a police visit? Um, I salute J.K. Rowling for having the guts to speak out against this intolerant mob. Now, on the issue that we're street raised about trans people on the wrong end of all statistics on hate crime, on self harm, suicide, mental health, he's probably right about that. Except one of those things, hate crime, like I said about the Scottish bill, that is contentious because if he's referring to people where you'd have a hate crime classified as getting really nasty verbal abuse or physically threatened, then yes, that's horrible. No one should go through that. And I think he's probably right on the issue of self harm, suicide, mental health. There should be compassion in those areas. That's why I don't really agree with, mocking trans people and kind of making fun of the gender dysphoria struggle that they're going through. I can't say that I empathize because I'm not in their shoes and I haven't been through that experience, but I do sympathize with anyone who has that identity crisis. It must be awful. So I really do sympathize in that area, to the point where they'd want to take their own life. It must be awful. But the hate crime thing, I mean, I've seen people describing hate. It's one of those words that get thrown around. I've seen people talk about hate simply because people want to debate the issues, for example, around biology. If I say the statement, I do not believe that a trans woman is the same as a biological woman, they would say I'm being a hateful bigot. And would Wes Streeting consider that to be a hate crime? Because that's my sincere belief, a belief shared by millions of people. This is where I really have a problem with the dogma because it is extremely intolerant and they weaponize the word hate. It's just thrown around for any different point of view. Now, if you have someone who is being really gratuitously hateful and they're saying, trans people are, and then list insults, I think that's wrong. I don't think people should be abused in that way. Um, but the point here is the trans lobby is not above bullying themselves. They've certainly targeted J.K. Rowling. There's been some truly misogynistic, disgusting comments aimed at women who stand up to this lobby. J.K. Rowling's a high profile example, but there are others. Um, Posey Parker, I think, was her stage name, the woman who was hounded in Oceania last year. I can't remember if it was Australia or New Zealand. I think it was New Zealand. But, she was confronted by a hateful mob of trans activists. Her safety was really, really compromised. And, they tried to justify that by saying she was cozying up to far right activists. Frankly, even if that were true, it doesn't justify the sort of mob behavior that she faced. So we hear a lot of, how trans people are victims. Well, there's trans ideologues who are not above engaging in bullying and intolerant behavior themselves. regarding compassion, I think people should be sensitive within reason. I don't think these are issues that people should sort of mock or joke about when there are suicides involved. But where I draw a line is saying if people are simply debating the issues, that should somehow be censored, or they're engaging in hate because they're simply saying, I am concerned about this. I am concerned about puberty blockers given to children. I am concerned about trans women potentially going into women's sports, etc. I think it's good that NHS England has blocked puberty, has prevented puberty blockers for children. I have a big problem with ideology being forced on children. You know, if you have a child and you have a little boy, for example, and he likes to wear dresses and he likes feminine things, that doesn't mean he's a trans child. It may simply mean he's effeminate. Um, so I have a big problem with sort of this rush to label children as trans. I also think there's some very unethical things the likes of Mermaids have engaged in, and the fact that these clinics haven't engaged with the study says a lot. What are they afraid of? Why aren't they engaging in this study? That would be, you know, if they're so concerned about trans rights, surely their feedback would help that. But they're going to say it's ideologically driven. Um, well, you know, that's basically saying that Dr. Cass is ideologically driven, so it's kind of labeling her that way. Um, by all accounts, she seems to be a respected professional. So, you know, what does Radcliffe and others have to say about that? She's a professional. She understands what she's talking about, and this is what she has concluded that there's shaky foundations. So I'd like to see what Radcliffe and co have to say about that, other than the cheap sound bites. One last thing. Radcliffe, Grint, and Watson don't have to agree with J.K. Rowling. I don't really take the view that because they got their success through Harry Potter, they have to blindly agree with her. No, they can have their opinions, they could disagree with her, but they have failed to call out the intolerance shown towards her. They have failed to recognize that there are legitimate points of view on both sides. It's not just them. You know, saying that there's, let's see, um, yeah, one of those actors said basically, yeah, well, I think Tennant's t-shirt's a disgrace. You absolute freaks. How dare you, David Tennant? How dare you? And I must admit my opinions went down of him, uh, given that. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. There will be more on this subject, so bear with me.